The rain had been falling for hours, steady and unapologetic, the kind that soaked through cheap fabric and made the city feel heavier than usual. Jasmine Reed stepped out from the side entrance of the Grand Meridian Hotel and pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders. It did nothing. The damp air clung to her skin, and her feet already ached inside worn heels she'd bought secondhand months ago. The hotel behind her glowed with warm light and soft jazz spilling from inside. Laughter drifted out each time the door opened. Well-dressed guests moved effortlessly beneath black umbrellas, protected, unbothered. Jasmine stood just outside that world, waiting for her ride that still hadn't arrived. She checked her phone again. No signal. The rideshare app spun uselessly before flashing a familiar message about unavailable drivers. Her stomach tightened. The last bus had left nearly 20 minutes ago. She did the math in her head, rent, utilities, groceries, and sighed. A long walk home in the rain wasn't ideal, but it wasn't new either. She stepped onto the sidewalk, careful on the slick stones. Each step sent a dull ache up her calves. Her shift had run long as usual. A last-minute gala. Extra cleanup. Extra smiles she didn't feel. All for an hourly rate that barely stretched far enough to keep the lights on. As she walked, Jasmine replayed the evening in fragments. The way guests spoke over her as if she were part of the furniture. The way a woman had handed her a half-empty glass without making eye contact. None of it surprised her anymore, but tonight it felt sharper. Maybe it was the rain. Maybe it was the exhaustion sitting deep in her bones. She reached the corner and stopped under a flickering streetlight. Water dripped steadily from the metal awning above. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and looked down the street, hoping to spot a bus that wouldn't come. That was when she noticed the SUV. It sat parked a few yards away, engine running, lights dimmed. Black, clean, expensive looking. The kind of car that usually belonged to guests, not staff. Jasmine hesitated. Her first instinct was to keep walking. Her second was to stand there and hope someone noticed her. She shifted her purse higher on her shoulder and glanced around. The sidewalk was nearly empty now. Most people had already gone inside or driven off. The rain seemed louder without the crowd. Jasmine took a breath and walked closer to the vehicle. She peered through the windshield and saw a man in the driver's seat. He looked calm, focused on something in front of him. A phone maybe. He wore a dark jacket, nothing flashy. For a moment she almost turned away. Then she reminded herself of her aching feet and the long walk ahead. She knocked lightly on the window. The man looked up, startled, then rolled the window down halfway. Warm air spilled out, smelling faintly of leather and something woody she couldn't place. "Sorry," Jasmine said quickly, already feeling self-conscious. "I thought you were a driver. Are you taking anyone right now?" He studied her for a second. Not in a way that felt uncomfortable. More like he was actually seeing her. Her wet hair. Her tired eyes. The catering badge still clipped to her dress. "Where are you headed?" he asked. His voice was calm even. No impatience. No edge. She told him her address, stumbling over the words as if saying them out loud made her situation more real. Mid-City. A small apartment building near the old grocery store. He nodded once. "Get in." Relief washed over her so fast it almost made her dizzy. She opened the back door and slid inside, grateful for the warmth. The door shut with a soft thud, sealing out the rain. As they pulled away from the curb, Jasmine stared out the window, watching the hotel disappear behind them. The city stretched ahead, slick and glowing. For the first time that night she felt her shoulders drop. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I really appreciate this." "No problem," he replied. "Rough night?" She let out a small laugh. "You could say that." They drove in silence for a while. The windshield wipers moved in a steady rhythm. Jazz played low through the speakers, something old and slow. Jasmine rested her head against the seat and closed her eyes for a second. She didn't know why she felt comfortable. She didn't know who he was or why he'd stopped. All she knew was that tonight, a stranger had made her feel seen. And she had no idea that this quiet ride through the rain was about to change far more than just how she got home. If this story already feels familiar in any way, you might want to stay with it. Sometimes the smallest moments carry the heaviest consequences. The SUV turned down a darker street, the city lights thinning out ahead, and Jasmine opened her eyes just as a strange thought crossed her mind. She realized she hadn't even asked his name. The car eased into traffic, tires whispering over wet asphalt. Jasmine sat back, hands folded tightly in her lap, listening to the rain drum against the roof. The warmth inside the SUV slowly seeped into her bones, and for a moment she forgot how tense she'd been standing outside the hotel. She glanced at the driver through the space between the front seats. His posture was relaxed but attentive, both hands steady on the wheel. He didn't fidget, didn't glance at his phone. He drove like someone who had nowhere urgent to be, which felt strange given the hour. The city slid past them in streaks of light. Closed shops. A gas station glowing like a small island. Puddles flashing beneath street lamps. Jasmine exhaled slowly, her breath fogging the glass before fading away. "You work at the hotel?" the man asked. "Yeah," she said. "Well, not the hotel exactly. Catering company. They bring us in for events." "That explains the late night." She nodded. "It always runs longer than they say it will." He let out a soft huff, not quite a laugh. "Seems to be how those things go." There was something about the way he listened that caught her off guard. He wasn't filling the silence to be polite. He was actually present. Jasmine wasn't used to that. Most people asked questions just long enough to move on. They stopped at a red light. A couple crossed the street in front of them, sharing an umbrella and laughing at something private. Jasmine watched them until the light turned green. "Do you live far?" he asked. "Not too far," she said. "Feels farther when you're tired." He nodded like he understood exactly what she meant. The radio shifted, the jazz fading into a low instrumental. The sound blended with the rain, and Jasmine felt herself relax further. Her guard lowered inch by inch. She told herself to stay alert, but it was hard to feel threatened by someone who drove this carefully, who spoke this gently. Still, questions stirred in the back of her mind. Why was he really parked outside the hotel? Why didn't he look like most drivers she'd seen? No uniform, no company logo, no constant checking of directions. She considered asking, then decided against it. She didn't want to risk turning a good thing into an awkward one. Sometimes it was better to accept help without dissecting it. The car turned onto a wider road, away from downtown. The buildings grew shorter. The lights spaced farther apart. Jasmine recognized the route and felt a small surge of relief. He hadn't asked for directions, yet he knew exactly where he was going. "You from around here?" she asked. "Long enough," he replied. That answer lingered. Long enough could mean anything. A year. A lifetime. They drove on. The rain softened to a drizzle and the streets grew quieter. Jasmine shifted in her seat, the fatigue finally catching up to her. Her body felt heavy, like it wanted to sink into the upholstery and stay there. "You okay back there?" he asked, glancing at her in the mirror. "Yeah," she said quickly. "Just tired." "I get that." She smiled to herself. It was such a simple response, but it landed. No advice. No commentary. Just acknowledgement. They passed a corner store with its lights still on, a lone employee mopping near the entrance. Jasmine thought of the other people still working while the city slept. People like her. People who kept things running without recognition. She wondered what kind of life the man in the front seat lived. He didn't sound tired in the same way she was. His exhaustion, if it existed, felt quieter, deeper. "Thanks again for this," she said after a moment. "You didn't have to." "I know," he replied. That was it. No explanation. No reassurance. Just the truth. The simplicity unsettled her more than a long justification would have. It suggested intention. Choice. They turned down her street, a narrow stretch lined with old brick buildings and uneven sidewalks. The car slowed. Jasmine's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the sudden awareness that this small pocket of peace was about to end. As the SUV rolled to a stop in front of her building, she leaned forward, peering at the familiar steps and the flickering porch light that never quite worked right. "This is me," she said, reaching for her purse. "Thank you." "Really?" He pulled the car into park. "Get inside safe." She opened the door and stepped out, the cool air brushing her face. She paused, one hand on the door, and looked back at him. For the first time, she noticed how little he looked like someone doing this for money. She hesitated, then closed the door and walked toward her building. Halfway up the steps, she glanced back. The SUV was still there, watching. And Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that this ride, as ordinary as it seemed, hadn't been ordinary at all. The moment Jasmine stepped into her apartment, the sound of the door clicking shut behind her felt heavier than usual. The rain outside had slowed to a drizzle, leaving puddles that reflected the orange glow of streetlights. She kicked off her wet heels and leaned against the door, letting out a long breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The warmth of her small living room wrapped around her like a soft blanket, but it couldn't chase away the lingering curiosity about the man who had driven her home. She dropped her purse on the kitchen counter and grabbed a towel to dry her hair. The scent of damp wood and the faint smell of last night's cooking lingered in the apartment, comforting in its familiarity. She glanced at her mailbox on the counter, mostly junk, bills and flyers. Nothing interesting. And yet, she found herself wishing for some note, some explanation for the strange kindness she had been shown. Sinking onto the couch, she tried to replay the ride in her mind. The way he had looked at her, not with pity but with something else. Something patient, observant. And how natural it felt, sitting there in silence, not having to justify her exhaustion or her worries. Most people barely noticed when she passed by, but he had. Her phone buzzed. A notification from her work group, morning schedule updated. She glanced at it and sighed. No ride home tonight, she reminded herself. She had to figure out transportation earlier in the day next time. But part of her hesitated to let the night end in her mind. Something about that drive had shifted something subtle inside her, a reminder that not all strangers were indifferent. She poured herself a glass of water and leaned back. The rain's rhythm outside became almost hypnotic, blending with the low hum of the refrigerator. It was peaceful, yet there was a tension she couldn't shake. Questions kept forming and dissolving in her mind. Who was he really? Why had he stopped? Was he just a kind stranger, or someone else entirely? For the first time in months, she felt small threads of possibility weaving through her thoughts, fragile and tentative. Possibilities she had buried under exhaustion and routine. Maybe life didn't have to be only work and survival. Maybe unexpected kindness existed. Jasmine shook her head, trying to dismiss the thoughts. She couldn't afford to daydream. Not when bills were due and her life was a careful balance of pennies. But even as she tried, a strange pull lingered in her chest, a sense that this man had, in some small way, made her feel seen. The next morning, she dragged herself out of bed with her usual reluctance. The city was wet but clearing, streets still slick from the night's rain. She dressed in her work uniform, her movements automatic, rehearsed. Her mind, however, kept wandering back to the SUV, to the man behind the wheel, to the strange calm he had carried, as if he belonged to a world entirely different from hers, yet somehow connected to her for a fleeting, significant moment. At work, everything was as expected. Plates to polish, tables to set, orders to manage. She smiled at guests politely, moved quickly between stations, and tried to shake the night's lingering thoughts. But small details kept pulling her attention. The way a silver tray reflected the light, the rhythm of footsteps on polished marble, the quiet moments when the noise dimmed for a heartbeat. She kept imagining him there, calmly observing, quietly present. That evening, exhausted but determined, she headed out for a brief walk, hoping to clear her mind. The city felt different somehow, still familiar, yet subtly altered in her perception. Every passing car, every glint of light, reminded her of the SUV, its quiet presence, and the man who had offered her a brief sanctuary from the rain. As she turned a corner, her phone buzzed with a message from a coworker. "Big event tomorrow, gallery downtown. You in?" Jasmine stared at the screen. A gallery event? High-profile guests, catered food. She typed a quick yes and put the phone down. Walking the last few blocks home, she realized her life, mundane as it seemed, was about to intersect with the unexpected again. And she couldn't shake the feeling that her night in the rain was only the beginning of something far more complicated, and far more revealing, than she could have imagined. Before she reached her apartment, she paused for a moment and looked up at the dim streetlights reflecting on wet pavement. The city seemed quiet, but she felt a thrill of anticipation, like something significant was waiting just around the corner. And deep down, she knew she wouldn't see it coming. The next evening, when she arrived at the gallery for the event, she would see him again. And this time, the world she thought she knew would begin to shift in ways she hadn't yet considered. The next evening, Jasmine arrived at the Contemporary Arts Gallery earlier than expected. The streets were slick from a light drizzle, but the city lights shimmered beautifully against the wet asphalt. Her stomach fluttered, not with nerves about work, she was used to that, but with a quiet sense of anticipation she couldn't explain. Inside, the gallery buzzed with activity. Waitstaff moved efficiently between clusters of elegantly dressed guests. Artists and patrons mingled, glasses clinked, and the faint hum of classical music floated through the space. Jasmine felt her usual blend of excitement and anxiety. She adjusted her apron, checked that the trays were polished, and began setting up in the designated corner. Then she saw him. Alexander Brooks. The man who had driven her home, whom she had assumed was just a kind stranger. Standing near the center of the room, talking with a group of investors, impeccably dressed in a dark suit, radiating calm authority. Her breath caught. For a moment, the tray in her hands felt impossibly heavy, and the polished floors blurred beneath her eyes. He looked different here. Not in appearance, he was still tall, composed and quiet, but in presence. The way he commanded attention without demanding it, the subtle way people seemed drawn to him, even without realizing why. Jasmine's pulse raced, a mix of awe, embarrassment and curiosity. "Excuse me," she whispered to a passing colleague, trying to steady herself. "Who's the keynote speaker tonight?" "That's Alexander Brooks," her co-worker replied casually. "Owner of Brooks Holdings. You know, the guy who owns half the skyline around here." Jasmine's stomach sank. She had heard of him in passing. A billionaire, notoriously private, rumored to be brilliant and temperamental in equal measure. And tonight, here he was, the same man who had offered her a ride without a word about his identity. She tried to focus on her duties, but every so often, her eyes flicked toward him. She noticed the same calm intensity she remembered from the ride. He didn't glance around the room nervously or check his phone. He simply observed, quietly, deliberately. At one point he caught her looking. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and for a heartbeat she felt an uncomfortable jolt, a mix of recognition and disbelief. He nodded slightly, a subtle acknowledgement that made her heart skip. Jasmine returned to arranging glasses and trays, her hands trembling slightly. How had she never guessed? And more importantly, why had he never mentioned it? The ride that had seemed like a simple, kind gesture now carried an entirely new weight. As she moved through the crowd, she overheard snippets of conversations. People talked about him with reverence and curiosity. "I heard he's investing in the new arts program downtown. He's unpredictable but brilliant. They say he's impossible to reach unless he wants you to." Jasmine felt a wave of self-consciousness. Here she was, a catering staffer, standing in the same room as someone whose name alone could dominate headlines. A gentle hand on her shoulder made her jump. She turned to see a colleague motioning toward a tray that had slipped slightly. "Careful," she whispered. Jasmine nodded and steadied it, but her mind was elsewhere. Minutes later, Alexander Brooks approached, glancing past the clusters of guests. He stopped near the catering station and gave her the smallest of smiles, the same calm, unreadable expression she remembered from that night in the rain. "Good to see you again, Jasmine," he said quietly, low enough that no one else seemed to hear. She froze, heart pounding. "Oh, hi," she stammered. I mean, you saved me that night." He nodded, as if acknowledging a shared secret. "Yes," he said simply. "I remember." Jasmine felt a strange mix of emotions. Shock, disbelief, and the faintest stirrings of connection. This was the man she had trusted, without even knowing his name. And now she realized she was seeing him in an entirely new light. She nodded, smiling nervously. Thanks again, I guess. For the ride." "It was nothing," he replied, his tone neutral but not dismissive. There was a subtle warmth there, an unspoken understanding that went beyond words. Jasmine went back to her work, but she kept stealing glances. He didn't speak to her again for the moment, yet his presence lingered like a quiet gravity, pulling her attention despite herself. As she moved through the gallery, placing trays and refilling glasses, a tiny thought gnawed at her. Why did he do it? Why drive her home, unnoticed, without any acknowledgement? Was it simply kindness, or was there something more intricate behind that gesture? By the time the first toast of the evening was announced, Jasmine felt a curious tension in her chest. The kind stranger had revealed himself to be a man whose world she could barely comprehend. And in the same instant, the ordinary life she had known, the rhythm of work, survival, quiet nights at her apartment, felt impossibly small. As the glasses clinked and the speeches began, she found herself wondering what this encounter would mean. Something told her, with a certainty she couldn't explain, that the night was far from over. And as she carried a tray of sparkling water past the crowd, she felt a brief, almost imperceptible glance from him, one that hinted at secrets yet to be revealed, and a story far larger than a simple ride home. The next morning, Jasmine woke to the low hum of the city outside her window. Sunlight glinted off the puddles still clinging to the streets below. She stretched, her muscles stiff from yesterday's long hours, and sighed. Another day, another set of shifts, another scramble to make ends meet. Yet, despite the fatigue, she felt a strange restlessness. Her thoughts kept returning to last night, the gallery, the clink of glasses, the low hum of music, and him. Alexander Brooks. The man who had driven her home in the rain, now revealed to be someone whose life seemed galaxies apart from her own. She had tried to dismiss it as an anomaly, a one-time coincidence. But it wasn't that simple. She dressed quickly, choosing practical shoes over heels this time. Breakfast was minimal: toast, peanut butter, coffee, but even as she ate, her mind wandered. What did it mean that he had noticed her? That he had remembered? That subtle nod, the quiet acknowledgement, it had lodged itself in her chest like a persistent ember. At work, the routine swallowed her at first. She moved between stations, wiped tables, refilled water glasses, and smiled at patrons who barely noticed her existence. Yet every so often, her eyes drifted toward the gallery invitation she had tucked into her apron pocket. The event had been meant for the catering staff, but somehow, it had left a mark on her. During a lull between orders, she found herself staring out the back door toward the street. The city had changed overnight. The wet pavement reflected neon signs and morning traffic. Jasmine's fingers drummed lightly on the counter. She thought about the man behind the wheel, the quiet gesture, and the warmth it had brought her. A small, irrational hope whispered in the corners of her mind. Maybe the world wasn't entirely indifferent. Her phone buzzed. A text from a coworker. "Big gala tonight. You're still on?" Jasmine's stomach tightened. She typed a quick reply. Yes. She didn't know why, but something told her to be there, to see what else might unfold. Throughout the day, she found herself distracted in subtle ways. A spilled drink, a dropped napkin, she barely noticed, her mind replaying fragments of the night before. The way the music had floated through the gallery, the smell of fresh flowers, the gentle hum of conversations. And always, the image of him observing quietly, as if he existed in a layer above ordinary life. She wondered if she had imagined it all. Surely someone like Alexander Brooks didn't notice people like her. But the memory was too vivid, too precise. And the feeling of being seen, truly seen, was undeniable. By mid-afternoon, her work was done for a short break. She leaned against the counter, staring at her reflection in the polished metal of the coffee urn. The tiredness etched on her face made her look older than her 24 years, but her eyes still held something stubbornly alive. Something that refused to be flattened by routine. As she sipped her lukewarm coffee, she replayed the ride in her mind. The gentle motion of the car, the faint scent of cedar and leather, the way he had driven with quiet attentiveness. He hadn't asked her why she was out late, hadn't offered advice, hadn't said anything unnecessary. He had simply driven her home. And that, somehow, felt extraordinary. Jasmine shook her head, trying to dismiss the swirl of emotions. She had work to do, bills to pay, life to live. And yet, the thought lingered. What if kindness existed like this in her world, beyond fleeting moments and surface-level interactions? What if there were people who could offer help without expecting anything in return? Her thoughts were interrupted by a call from her mother, checking in with her usual mix of concern and cheer. "Did you eat breakfast? Did you dress warmly? Don't stay out too late tonight, Jasmine." The familiar maternal worries made her smile. "I'm fine, Mom. Just a long day at work." She hung up, feeling a pang of longing. Her mother lived in another city, and calls like this reminded her how small her world sometimes felt. As she prepared for her shift later that evening, Jasmine couldn't shake the anticipation that had settled in her chest. Something was about to happen. She didn't know what or how or why. But the memory of the man who had quietly driven her home lingered like a faint echo in her mind, a whisper that the ordinary rhythms of her life were on the brink of being disrupted. By the time she left for the gallery that evening, the sky had darkened, clouds heavy and pregnant with more rain. The streets glistened with reflections of streetlights, and the city smelled of wet asphalt and possibilities. Jasmine's steps were brisk but careful. Her mind raced with questions she couldn't answer. As she approached the gallery, she paused under a flickering streetlight. Her heartbeat quickened. Somewhere inside, a quiet voice told her, tonight things would no longer be the same. She didn't yet know what awaited her, but she felt it, an invisible pull toward a moment that would demand attention, courage, and perhaps a confrontation with the unexpected. And then, through the crowd gathering outside the gallery, she caught sight of him. Standing tall, calm, and impossibly composed, Alexander Brooks was already there, waiting, or perhaps just observing as he always seemed to do. For Jasmine, the ordinary night had ended. The extraordinary was about to begin. The city streets were slick with the evening drizzle as Jasmine approached the Contemporary Arts Gallery. The gallery's glass doors reflected the warm lights inside, flickering across the wet pavement like tiny beacons. She tightened her jacket around herself, the damp air clinging to her hair, and took a deep breath. Tonight, she reminded herself, she was just part of the catering team, an invisible thread in a night designed to showcase wealth, art, and influence. But beneath that thought, a quiet tension hummed in her chest, a prelude to the unknown. Inside, the gallery was alive with movement. Guests in tailored suits and elegant dresses navigated the open space, glasses of champagne in hand, laughter echoing softly under the high ceilings. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint and polished wood. Jasmine's apron, spotless but slightly creased, reminded her where she belonged, serving, moving, observing. And then she saw him. Alexander Brooks. Even from a distance, he commanded attention without raising his voice or demanding it. He stood near the center of the room, speaking quietly to a small group of investors. His dark suit was immaculate, pressed in a way only a man accustomed to influence could achieve. But it wasn't just the clothes, it was the calm, deliberate way he moved, the quiet confidence in his gestures, the subtle intensity of his gaze as he listened. Jasmine froze, clutching the edge of the tray she was carrying. The man who had driven her home through pouring rain, who had offered her a moment of unprompted kindness, was not a simple stranger. He was a billionaire. One of the city's most reclusive, quietly powerful men. The realization hit her in a wave. Her night in the rain hadn't been ordinary at all. She took a cautious step forward, trying to steady her hands. Her pulse raced, but not from fear. It was awe, disbelief, and something more complicated. A mixture of admiration and discomfort at the gap between their worlds. She reminded herself to focus on work. Keep moving. Don't stare. But the gallery seemed to shrink around her. Every laugh, every clink of glasses, every soft conversation felt like a backdrop to the singular image of him. He noticed her almost immediately, or perhaps he had always noticed. Their eyes met across the room for a fleeting moment, and she felt a jolt of recognition, that same strange mix of embarrassment and intrigue she had felt the night he drove her home. He nodded slightly, as if acknowledging the shared secret of their encounter in the rain. Jasmine tried to focus on her tasks, arranging trays and refilling glasses, but her mind refused to settle. The memory of the ride, the quiet, attentive manner, the faint scent of cedar and leather, the unspoken respect. surfaced again and again. She couldn't reconcile that memory with the man now speaking with investors, the man whose very presence seemed to bend the room's attention toward him. She overheard snippets of conversations nearby. Brooks Holdings is taking over the waterfront development. I heard he's impossible to reach unless he wants you to be. His investments are brilliant, unpredictable, and ruthless. The words only heightened her awareness of the chasm separating their lives. Yet even amidst whispers of wealth and influence, he carried that same quiet intensity she remembered. A colleague brushed past her, murmuring something about glasses needing refilling. Jasmine nodded, hands shaking slightly as she completed her task. Her thoughts, however, were elsewhere, tangled in questions. Why had he driven her home that night? Why had he offered kindness without expectation? And why did she feel, even now, that something more significant lingered beneath his calm exterior? As she moved through the crowd, she noticed him glance her way again. Not in passing, but deliberate, subtle. A recognition. An acknowledgement. He didn't speak, didn't approach, but the weight of his gaze made her acutely aware of her place in the room, and somehow, of her own significance. Jasmine carried her tray past a display of modern sculptures, each angular form glinting under the gallery lights. Her reflection caught in the polished surfaces, a reminder of her ordinary, unremarkable life, yet now threaded with the extraordinary presence of this man. She realized that the ride home had not been a singular act of kindness. It had been a thread connecting two very different lives in a way she was only beginning to understand. A small shiver ran down her spine, whether from the lingering chill of the evening or anticipation, she couldn't tell. She caught a brief smile from him across the room, a subtle, almost imperceptible curve of the lips that said more than words ever could. For a moment, she imagined speaking to him, asking why, how, what drove him to notice someone like her. But the gallery's energy swallowed her courage, leaving her with only questions. By the time the first formal announcements began, Jasmine was acutely aware of one truth. Nothing about this night, or the man who had quietly driven her home, was ordinary. And deep down, she sensed that the encounter she had once considered fleeting was about to ripple into unexpected, life-altering consequences. As the lights dimmed for the keynote speech, she found herself glancing toward him one last time. Alexander Brooks didn't smile, didn't wave. He simply observed, calm and composed, a quiet gravity in the chaos of the gallery. And Jasmine realized, with a mixture of awe and unease, that this night was only the beginning. Something significant was about to unfold. The applause swelled as Alexander Brooks stepped onto the small stage at the center of the gallery. The lights shifted, warm and focused, casting soft shadows across the polished floor. Conversations faded into murmurs, then silence. Jasmine stood near the back with a tray of water glasses balanced carefully in her hands, her arms suddenly tense, as if the weight had doubled. She watched him from a distance, her mind still struggling to reconcile two versions of the same man. The quiet driver who had listened without interruption. And this, someone whose presence alone could still a room. "Good evening," Alexander said into the microphone. His voice was steady. Not loud. Not rehearsed. It carried naturally, the way a calm voice does when it doesn't need to prove itself. Jasmine felt a strange tightening in her chest. She remembered that same tone asking her where she was headed on a rain-soaked street. As he spoke about art, community, and the responsibility of investing beyond profit, Jasmine tried to focus on her work. She moved carefully through the crowd, offering glasses, nodding politely when guests thanked her. But fragments of his speech kept slipping past her defenses. "Visibility matters," he said at one point. "There are people who keep our cities running who are rarely acknowledged. Art reminds us to look again." Her hand faltered for half a second. She steadied the tray, hoping no one noticed. It felt impossible that his words were accidental. Too close. Too precise. When the speech ended, applause filled the room again. Guests surged forward, eager to congratulate him, to be seen next to him, to say something memorable. Jasmine retreated slightly, letting the current pass. She didn't see him approach until he was already standing in front of her. "Hi," he said quietly. Up close, the contrast felt sharper. His suit was tailored, crisp. his expression composed. But his eyes, those hadn't changed. They held the same calm attentiveness she remembered. "Hi," she replied, her voice lower than she expected. "I hope I didn't catch you off guard earlier," he said. She hesitated, then let out a small, nervous laugh. "That's one way to put it." He nodded once. "I figured you'd recognize me eventually." Jasmine swallowed. I didn't realize. That night. I thought you were a driver," he finished gently. "Yes. I didn't correct you," he said. "I wasn't sure how." She studied his face, searching for something. Amusement, superiority, anything that would make this easier to categorize. She found none of it. "So you just drive around?" she asked before she could stop herself. A faint smile touched his lips. "Sometimes." The answer didn't satisfy her, and he seemed to know it. "Why?" she asked. The question hung between them, heavier than the noise of the room. Why stop? Why notice? Why her? Alexander didn't answer right away. He glanced around, then back at her. Because it felt like the right thing to do. Jasmine let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. The simplicity of the answer unsettled her. People with power rarely did things without reason. Without strategy. "And now," she asked, "is this still just the right thing?" His gaze didn't waver. "That depends on what you think it was." Before she could respond, someone interrupted them. A man in a gray suit, hand extended, eager smile already in place. Alexander excused himself politely, promising to find her later. Jasmine watched him disappear into the crowd, her heart pounding. Find her later. The words echoed, filling the space he'd left behind. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. She worked on autopilot, her mind replaying every word, every look. She noticed how often his eyes searched the room, how frequently they found her without lingering too long. As if he were careful not to draw attention. As if he understood exactly how visible she already felt. Near the end of the event, as guests began to filter out, Jasmine stepped outside briefly to catch her breath. The air was cool, the rain finally gone. The city hummed softly around her. She leaned against the wall, closing her eyes. "You okay?" She opened them to see him standing a few feet away, hands in his pockets, jacket unbuttoned now. Less formal. More familiar. "I think so," she said. "I didn't mean to complicate your life," he said quietly. That stopped her. "You don't even know my life," she replied. He met her gaze. "I know enough to know it isn't simple." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The distance between them felt charged, fragile. "I should go," Jasmine said finally. He nodded. "Of course." She turned to leave, then paused. "That night," she said without looking back, "I trusted you because I thought you were just a stranger." She felt his words before she heard them. "And now?" She didn't answer. She walked away, her footsteps echoing on the pavement, her mind racing. Behind her, Alexander remained where he was, watching her go, his expression unreadable. And Jasmine knew, whatever that ride had been, whatever this was becoming, it was no longer simple. And the next choice she made would matter far more than she was ready to admit. The next morning, Jasmine woke with a lingering sense of disorientation. The events at the gallery replayed in her mind like a film on a loop. His calm presence, the subtle acknowledgement, and the quiet power that seemed to radiate from him without effort. She poured herself a cup of coffee, the bitter aroma grounding her, but nothing could shake the mix of curiosity and unease that had settled in her chest. She went about her morning routine almost mechanically, brushing her teeth, pulling her hair into a messy bun, checking her reflection in the mirror. There was nothing different on the surface, yet she felt altered. Her steps toward the kitchen felt heavier, more deliberate, and the coffee cup warmed her hands as if to remind her that the world outside her apartment had continued to turn while she replayed last night's encounter. Work passed in its usual rhythm, but Jasmine's mind wandered constantly. Every time she walked past a mirror or a window, she found herself imagining him there, watching, judging, observing. She shook her head, trying to push the thought away. It was absurd. He was a billionaire and she was a catering assistant. Their lives shouldn't intersect again, not beyond that one surreal night. But when her coworker leaned over, whispering about the next big event, a private dinner for a group of city philanthropists, her pulse skipped. "You're on that, right?" the woman asked. Jasmine nodded, unsure why she agreed so quickly. Something told her this event wouldn't just be another shift. Something about him lingered like a quiet pull, drawing her forward, despite the rational part of her mind that warned caution. Later that evening, the gallery transformed again. Tables were pushed back to create an open space for conversation, the lighting soft and intentional. Guests arrived in small clusters, laughter and clinking glasses filling the air. Jasmine moved among them, refilling water glasses, offering small smiles, trying to stay invisible, but the pull of anticipation was undeniable. And then she saw him again. Alexander Brooks, standing near the center of the room, talking quietly with a small group. He looked different than the night before, less formal, yet every bit as composed, every bit as quietly commanding. His gaze swept the room, scanning, observing. And then, almost deliberately, it found her. Her stomach twisted, a mix of nerves and recognition. Their eyes met, and she felt the same jolt she had during that first encounter in the rain. Not just surprise, but something heavier, more charged. Something unspoken hung between them. As she moved through the crowd, her duties demanding attention, she noticed the subtle ways he seemed to navigate the space. Listening intently, stepping aside for staff without making it obvious, acknowledging people with a tilt of his head rather than a forced smile. He was present, fully, yet he remained deliberately distant. Jasmine couldn't tell if he was keeping her safe from the crowd or simply observing from a careful distance. A brief lull gave her a chance to step outside for air. The city was alive with evening sounds, distant sirens, the hum of traffic, the occasional laughter from late-night diners. Jasmine leaned against the building, trying to steady her racing heart. She thought about him, about that night in the rain, and how little she truly knew. "Taking a break?" a familiar voice said from behind her. She turned sharply to see him standing there, hands casually in his pockets, the faintest smile on his lips. "Yes," she admitted, a little breathless. "Just air." He nodded, not too close but not distant either. "Good," he said simply. "Sometimes you need it." They stood there for a long moment, neither speaking, the city noises wrapping around them. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was deliberate, intimate even, filled with the weight of unspoken understanding. Jasmine finally broke it. "Why do you do it?" she asked, curiosity pushing through caution. "Why notice someone like me?" He glanced down, then back at her, his eyes steady. "Because someone has to. And because sometimes you see someone and it matters." Her lips parted, but no words came. She realized that she was asking more than he could, or would, answer. And somehow that was enough for now. When a waiter called his name from inside, he gave her a subtle nod, a quiet acknowledgement, then disappeared back into the gallery. Jasmine exhaled, her chest heavy with questions she didn't have the answers to. As she watched him vanish, she felt a shift. Something unspoken had begun between them, delicate yet undeniable. And deep down, she knew their next encounter would change everything, though she had no idea how or in what direction. Outside, the city hummed on, indifferent yet alive, leaving Jasmine with a sense of anticipation that refused to fade. Tonight had not ended. It had only begun. Jasmine woke the next morning to the sound of her phone buzzing on the nightstand. Groggy, she reached for it, blinking at the notification. A message from her coworker about the day's catering schedule. She groaned softly, wishing for a few more hours of sleep, but even in her tired state, her mind was elsewhere, on Alexander Brooks. The memory of him standing outside the gallery the night before replayed in fragments. The quiet acknowledgement, the weight of his gaze, and the words that had lingered long after he disappeared. "Sometimes, you see someone and it matters." She had repeated those words to herself almost obsessively on the walk to work, letting them echo in her chest like a rhythm she couldn't shake. At the gallery, the evening began much like the previous nights. Guests arriving in small clusters, waitstaff moving efficiently, and the low hum of conversation filling the high ceilings. Jasmine moved from table to table, refilling drinks and carrying trays, but her attention flickered to the center of the room, where Alexander was quietly surveying the space. He noticed her immediately, as if he could sense the pull of her eyes even from a distance. Their gazes met briefly, and she felt the familiar jolt, the kind that made her stomach tighten and her pulse quicken. She quickly looked away, arranging glasses to ground herself, but her hands shook slightly despite her best efforts. A guest bumped into her tray, nearly spilling sparkling water across the polished floor. "Careful," Jasmine murmured, steadying it. Alexander's voice cut through the background chatter, calm and composed. "Take your time," he said, low enough that only she could hear. She froze, a small shiver running down her spine. Her heart pounded. She glanced around, no one else had noticed. He was close enough for her to feel the warmth of his presence without it being obvious to the rest of the room. As the night progressed, she caught small glimpses of him moving through the crowd. He wasn't just observing, he was paying attention to the little things, the servers, the staff, the way people navigated the space. Occasionally their eyes met, and she felt a pull, a connection she couldn't explain. During a lull, she stepped outside for a moment to get some air. The city smelled of wet asphalt and early evening rain. She leaned against the gallery wall, letting the cool air wash over her. She felt restless, caught between exhaustion and anticipation. "Mind some company?" a familiar voice asked. She turned to see Alexander standing a few feet away, casual, approachable, yet undeniably commanding. Sure," she said, trying to steady her voice. He stepped closer but kept a respectful distance. "You're quieter than usual tonight," he said softly. "I'm tired," she admitted. "Long day." Her words felt small against the weight of the unspoken tension between them. He nodded as if he understood more than she said. "It shows," he said gently. "But you're handling it well." She smiled faintly, not trusting herself to speak much more. There was something grounding about his presence, but also unsettling. Every interaction felt like a test she didn't understand, a puzzle she didn't know how to solve. "I keep thinking about that night," she said after a pause, finally daring to speak. "The rain. The ride home. I don't understand why you did it." His gaze softened, thoughtful. "I told you then. Sometimes it matters who you see. Sometimes it's enough to act on that." She nodded, chewing on the words. They were simple yet profound. She realized she hadn't just been noticed, she had been acknowledged in a way few people ever had. And it left her feeling both vulnerable and strangely alive. A sudden noise inside the gallery, a dropped glass, a burst of laughter, reminded them of the room they were stepping away from. He glanced back toward the open doors. "I should go," he said, but his voice lacked finality. Jasmine exhaled, a mix of relief and disappointment. "Yeah," she said softly. "See you soon?" He gave a small, unreadable smile. "Soon." As he walked back inside, Jasmine leaned against the wall, feeling the space he left behind stretch around her like a quiet echo. The city pulsed softly, indifferent to the tension she felt, but she knew something had shifted. Whatever connection had begun in the rain, in a simple act of kindness, was far from over. And the thought both thrilled and terrified her. For the first time she realized that her life, the ordinary rhythm of work, exhaustion and survival, was about to be disrupted in ways she hadn't even imagined. And she wasn't sure she was ready for it. The night air was thick with the scent of rain and asphalt as Jasmine walked back from the gallery, her footsteps echoing on the slick sidewalks. The city felt quieter than usual, almost intimate, as if it were holding its breath. She clutched her purse tightly, her mind still replaying the evening, the quiet moments, the fleeting glances, the subtle acknowledgement that had kept her heart racing long after Alexander Brooks had disappeared back into the gallery. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out to see a message from an unknown number. "I need to see you. Tomorrow. No. 45th and Main." Her stomach twisted. She didn't recognize the number. Hesitation waged war with curiosity. Part of her wanted to ignore it, chalk it up to someone random, maybe even a prank. But another part, the part that had felt that quiet pull since the night in the rain, urged her to respond. Against her better judgment, she typed, "Who is this?" The reply was almost immediate, Alexander. Don't tell anyone. Just come. Her breath caught in her throat. That voice. That name. She read it twice, triple-checked it, and then stared at the message in disbelief. Alexander Brooks. The man who had quietly driven her home, the man who had moved through the gallery like a force of nature, the man who now wanted to see her alone. Questions swirled. Why now? Why meet in a neutral place instead of his office or home? And most importantly, why had he never revealed his identity sooner? But curiosity outweighed caution, and by the time she walked into her apartment, she had already decided she would go. The next day, Jasmine arrived at the designated corner just before noon. The intersection was busy but not crowded, a blend of office workers and street vendors. She scanned the area, heart pounding, until she saw him, standing casually near a coffee cart, coat unbuttoned, hands tucked into pockets. He looked entirely ordinary at first glance, but his presence made the world seem sharper, edges clearer, colors more vivid. "Hi," he said as she approached, voice low and calm, a private island in the middle of the city chaos. "Hi," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "You got my message," he said. "Good." She nodded, unsure how to respond. Silence settled between them for a moment, charged but not uncomfortable. Then he gestured toward a nearby bench. "Sit," he said simply. She hesitated but obeyed. As she settled, the reality hit her fully. She was here, alone with a billionaire, someone whose life existed on an entirely different plane than hers. And yet, here he was, treating her as though she mattered. "I wanted to explain," he began, eyes steady on hers. "That night, when I drove you home, I couldn't introduce myself. It wasn't safe. Not for either of us." She blinked. "Safe?" He nodded. "My world, it's complicated. People notice things. People assume things. If I had introduced myself, it wouldn't have been simple. And sometimes, simple is the only way to help someone without making their life harder." The words landed differently than she expected. She had imagined arrogance, entitlement, even condescension. Instead there was honesty, transparency, and a quiet humility that unsettled her more than any display of wealth or power could. "And now?" she asked, curiosity piercing through caution. "Why tell me now?" "Because it's necessary," he said. "I need you to understand who I am, because things are about to get complicated. And I want you to be prepared." Her stomach tightened. Complicated. Prepared. The words rang in her ears, heavy with unspoken implications. Something about his tone made her sense that this was more than a casual meeting. It was a warning, a prelude to a shift in her life she couldn't yet see. Before she could ask more, his expression changed, the first flicker of intensity she had ever seen. He leaned forward slightly, voice dropping. "There's someone watching you." Her heart lurched. "What?" "Not here," he said, eyes scanning the intersection, subtle but precise. "But soon. And soon enough to make this meeting necessary." Fear, sharp and immediate, surged through her. Questions collided. Who? What? How could someone be watching her? And most importantly, what did Alexander know that she didn't? He leaned back, letting the words sink in, his calm presence still an anchor even as tension coiled like a spring between them. "I promise," he said quietly, "you're not in danger now. But you need to trust me." She swallowed, trying to steady her voice. "I don't know if I can, fully." "You will," he said, his gaze unwavering. "I just need you to be aware. And ready." The stranger who had quietly driven her home was not just a billionaire. He was a man operating in a world that could threaten her life, for reasons she could barely comprehend. And as she left the bench, following him back toward the city streets, Jasmine realized that nothing about her life would ever be ordinary again. The next morning, Jasmine woke with a sense of unease she couldn't shake. Even the familiar hum of the city outside her window felt different, sharper, more insistent, as though the streets themselves were whispering warnings she couldn't yet understand. The message from Alexander and the revelation at the corner bench replayed endlessly in her mind. Someone was watching her. What? And how had he known? She tried to focus on routine, breakfast, shower, preparing for her shift. But every noise, honking horns, footsteps on the sidewalk, Even the rustle of trash bags in the alley made her flinch. She kept checking her phone, half expecting another message from him, some instruction or warning. But there was nothing. Silence. That silence was worse than words. At work she felt eyes on her. Not just the casual glances of coworkers or the polite acknowledgement of patrons, but something heavier. She caught a shadow moving in the corner of her vision, glanced up and saw nothing. Her pulse quickened. She tried to tell herself it was paranoia, exhaustion, overthinking. But deep down she knew something had shifted. By mid-afternoon her shift ended. She walked quickly toward the subway station, hugging her coat around her. The city was alive, yet her world had narrowed to the immediate. Every glance over her shoulder, every sudden sound made her heart pound. Her phone buzzed finally. A message from Alexander: "Go to the corner of 52nd and Pine in 30 minutes. Don't bring anyone. And don't follow your instincts, just trust me." Her stomach tightened. He didn't explain why, he didn't give context. She wasn't sure she wanted to ask. The fact that he was orchestrating these meetings, carefully controlling what she knew, only made the tension coil tighter. 30 minutes later she arrived at the intersection. The city hummed, indifferent to her anxiety, traffic moving like clockwork. Alexander was there, leaning against a lamppost, eyes scanning the street like a predator tracking movement. "Stay close," he said as she approached. "But do not speak unless I tell you to." Her pulse raced. The calmness in his voice was paradoxical, commanding yet soothing. She obeyed, following his lead as he navigated them through side streets and quieter avenues. After several blocks, they stopped in front of an unmarked building. He motioned for her to wait while he approached the door. The click of the lock echoed faintly as it opened. He looked back, eyes serious. Inside. Now. The interior was dimly lit, sparse, but something felt purposeful about the space. He gestured toward a chair. "Sit." She did, trying not to show how nervous she was. Her hands clutched her purse like a lifeline. Alexander moved toward a console in the corner, pulling up a small screen. Images flickered to life. Photos of her from yesterday, from earlier that morning, taken from a distance. A man in a nondescript car followed her route, documenting every step. Jasmine froze. Who is that?" Her voice trembled. "Someone who shouldn't be," he said. "Someone who has been tracking you for days. I don't know all the details yet, but I need you to understand, this isn't random. You're involved in something bigger than you realize." Her mind raced. Tracking her? Days. Oh, what? What do you mean, something bigger? I'm just me. He looked at her sharply, voice softening only slightly. "You're not just you. That night in the rain, it wasn't random either. You were at the right place at the right time. And now, that connection has drawn attention. Dangerous attention." Her chest tightened. Every rational thought fled. Dangerous? What kind of? I don't understand. "You will," he said, pacing slightly, calm but precise. "But you need to trust me. For now, your safety depends on following my instructions without question. That includes hiding your movements, avoiding certain areas, and staying alert. Do not interact with anyone who seems off." The weight of the revelation hit her like a physical force. Her ordinary life, her quiet routines, the small struggles she had fought through, everything had been upended. She realized that the world she had assumed was mundane was far more complex, far more dangerous, than she could have imagined. She swallowed, nodding. "Okay, I'll do whatever you say." He studied her for a moment, then softened. "I know this is a lot. I'll explain more, but right now we need to be careful. Every choice counts." The room fell silent except for the faint hum of the equipment. Jasmine felt the tension coil in her chest like a living thing, and for the first time she realized the depth of the danger Alexander had been shielding her from all along. Outside, the city moved on, oblivious to the stakes, while inside, Jasmine understood one immutable truth: her life was no longer her own. And the decisions she made in the coming hours could change everything. A shadow passed the window. Jasmine flinched. Alexander noticed, his expression hardening. "Stay close. This isn't over." The first layer of safety had been pierced, and the true danger had only just begun. The day dragged on like a slow-moving storm. Jasmine could barely concentrate at work, her mind replaying the images Alexander had shown her. The man in the car, the photos, the silent, watchful presence tracking her every step. Every honk of a horn, every passerby on the sidewalk, felt like a potential threat. She tried to appear calm, serving drinks and arranging trays, but inside, her nerves were taut as piano wire. By mid-afternoon, she finally received a discreet text from Alexander, "Meet me at the usual place." Now. Her stomach dropped. The usual place, the corner of 52nd and Pine. She knew that it wasn't a casual meeting. Whatever was coming, it wasn't small. She slipped out of the gallery quietly, ignoring the curious glances of co-workers, and made her way through the crowded streets, keeping her head down. Every shadow seemed too long, every passerby's glance too deliberate. When she arrived, Alexander was already there, leaning against a lamppost, eyes scanning the street with that calm intensity she had come to recognize. He gestured for her to follow him down a narrow alleyway, away from the main street. The alley was dimly lit, wet from a recent drizzle. Trash bins lined one side, and the hum of traffic from the main road was muffled. Jasmine felt a shiver run down her spine. "Stay close," he said, voice low, almost a whisper yet commanding. "And don't speak unless I tell you." Her pulse raced, but she obeyed. He led her deeper into the alley, moving with a precision that suggested he had walked this path before. Around the corner he paused. His eyes narrowed. "They're here," he said quietly. "The ones following you. We don't know their full intentions yet, but they're watching your movements closely. They're not amateurs. Be ready for anything." Before she could respond, the sound of a car engine echoed from the far end of the alley. Two black SUVs slid into view, moving slowly. The tinted windows reflected the dim streetlight, concealing the occupants. Jasmine's stomach dropped. Alexander didn't flinch. He stepped slightly in front of her, protective but not panicked. "Keep your hands visible. Move slowly," he instructed. The SUV stopped a few feet from them. The windows rolled down, revealing two men in suits, faces unreadable, eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. One of them spoke into a phone, then gestured toward Alexander and Jasmine. Jasmine's heart pounded. This was real. This was danger she could feel, not just imagine. Alexander's gaze was calm but razor-sharp. "Don't move until I tell you," he whispered. He shifted slightly, positioning himself between her and the men, a silent shield. The man with the phone stepped out of the SUV, still maintaining a professional, detached demeanor. "Mr. Brooks," he said. His voice was measured, but Jasmine caught the edge of threat beneath the surface. Alexander's posture didn't change. "Who are you?" he asked evenly. The man smiled faintly. "We're interested in her. That's all you need to know for now." Jasmine's chest tightened. "Interested in me?" she whispered, barely audible. Alexander's eyes met hers, sharp and urgent. "Stay calm. Don't respond. Let me handle this." Her mind raced. Why her? What had she done to draw attention? Questions collided with fear, but she forced herself to obey, trusting him even as every instinct screamed to run. The man in the suit stepped closer, extending a hand toward her. Alexander moved with lightning precision, blocking the motion without breaking eye contact. "Back off," he said, calm but firm. The tension stretched across the alley, thick and almost tangible. Jasmine could feel her pulse in her temples, her hands trembling slightly, but she stayed rooted in place, watching the interaction like a spectator to a dangerous dance. Finally, the man with the phone signaled, and the two SUVs reversed slowly, melting back into the shadows. Alexander didn't relax immediately. He kept his stance, scanning the alley and surrounding streets, until he was certain they were gone. He finally exhaled and turned to her. "You're lucky," he said quietly. "They were testing you, seeing how easily they could get close." Jasmine shook, the adrenaline still racing through her veins. Why me? What do they want?" Alexander didn't answer directly. "Soon you'll understand. For now, the important thing is that you stay alert, trust me, and never go anywhere alone unless I say it's safe." Her legs felt like lead as she nodded. She realized that the quiet life she had known, the evenings spent working, the simple routines, was over. Danger had arrived, unannounced, and her connection with Alexander had pulled her directly into it. And as they walked back toward the main street, side by side but a silent distance apart, Jasmine understood a chilling truth. Her life was no longer her own, and the threats she faced were far bigger than she had ever imagined. Jasmine didn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the black SUVs easing into the alley, the slow roll of tinted windows, the way those men looked at her like she was an object that had finally been located. By morning, her body felt hollow, like fear had burned through everything else and left only nerves behind. Her phone buzzed just after sunrise. "Pack a small bag. I'm picking you up in 1 hour. Alexander." No explanation. No reassurance. Just instruction. She sat on the edge of her bed for a long time, staring at the message. Part of her wanted to refuse. Another part wanted to disappear. But the memory of the man stepping in front of her, calm and unflinching, overpowered the fear. She packed clothes, her work ID, a few personal items, and a worn photograph of her mother she kept tucked in a book. It didn't feel like an overnight bag. It felt like evacuation. Alexander arrived in an unmarked sedan, different from the one she remembered from the rain. No driver this time. He was alone. "Get in," he said gently, opening the passenger door for her. As soon as they pulled away, Jasmine noticed something was different. He wasn't watching the road the way most people did. His eyes flicked constantly to mirrors, reflections, side streets. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere quiet," he replied. "Somewhere they won't expect." She hugged her bag closer. "You keep saying they. You haven't told me who they are." He was silent for several blocks. Then he exhaled slowly as if making a decision he'd been delaying. "Do you remember the night we met?" he asked. "In the rain," she said. "You drove me home. You were coming from a closed restaurant 2 blocks from my corporate offices," he said. "That restaurant hasn't existed for months." Her stomach tightened. "What?" "I didn't realize it until later," he continued. "I thought you were just someone caught in a storm. But that location mattered." She frowned. "I was there because my bus broke down. I cut through that block all the time." "I know," he said. "That's what makes this dangerous." They stopped at a red light. He turned to face her fully for the first time since she'd gotten in. "Jasmine, 2 years ago, my company uncovered a financial laundering pipeline tied to a private investment group operating under several shell charities. When we froze their assets, people disappeared. Whistleblowers. Accountants. A driver." Her chest felt tight. "What does that have to do with me?" "One of the shell companies used a temporary mailing address," he said. "That restaurant. Same block. Same building." The light turned green, but he didn't move for a second. "They think you're connected," he finished. The world tilted. "That's insane. I clean tables. I serve drinks. I don't know anything about investments." "They don't know that yet," he said. "They think you might be someone who saw something. Or someone pretending not to." She stared out the window, watching the city blur past. "So they're watching me, because of where I walked?" "Yes," he said quietly. "And because I intervened." She looked back at him sharply. "This is my fault now?" "No," he said immediately. "It's mine." That landed harder than she expected. They arrived at a modest townhouse in a quiet neighborhood far from downtown. No security gates. No visible cameras. It looked ordinary. Intentional. Inside, the space was clean, lived in, understated. Not the home of a billionaire. The home of someone who didn't want to be found. "You'll stay here for a few days," he said. "No work. No routines. I'll bring what you need." "And you?" she asked. "I'll be close," he said. "But not obvious." She hesitated, then asked the question that had been clawing at her since the alley. "Why protect me this much?" He paused near the doorway, his back to her. "Because the last time I underestimated how far they'd go," he said, "someone innocent paid the price." He turned back to her, and for the first time, his composure cracked just enough for her to see something raw beneath it. "I won't let that happen again." Silence settled between them, heavy and unresolved. Outside, a car passed slowly down the street. Alexander's gaze snapped to the window. Jasmine felt the familiar chill crawl up her spine. Whatever had started with a simple ride home had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. And now hiding wasn't just about safety. It was about time running out. The townhouse settled into an uneasy quiet after Alexander left. Jasmine stood in the middle of the living room, her small bag at her feet, listening to the muted sounds of the neighborhood outside. A lawn sprinkler clicked somewhere nearby. A dog barked once, then stopped. Ordinary sounds, the kind she used to find comforting. Now they felt staged, like background noise meant to lull her into forgetting where she was. She walked from room to room slowly. The space was modest but intentional. No family photos. No clutter. Just a couch, a table, shelves with a few carefully chosen books. In the bedroom, fresh sheets waited on the bed, neatly made. Someone had prepared this place in advance. That realization tightened her chest. She checked her phone. No new messages. No missed calls. Alexander had taken it upon himself to disappear just as efficiently as he'd appeared. Jasmine sat on the edge of the bed and tried to breathe evenly. Her thoughts kept circling the same point. All of this started because I walked down the wrong block. The randomness of it made her feel small and exposed. She had survived harder things than this, long nights, unpaid bills, being invisible, but this was different. This wasn't about endurance. This was about being targeted. Hours passed. She dozed lightly, waking at every unfamiliar sound. Sometime after dusk, the lights outside flickered on, casting long shadows across the walls. Her phone buzzed, making her jump. "I'm nearby. Don't open the door for anyone. Alexander." She typed back before she could stop herself. "Are they close?" The response took longer than she liked. "Closer than I want." Her stomach dropped. She stood and moved to the window, careful not to part the curtains too much. The street looked calm. A few parked cars. A porch light across the way. Nothing out of place. And yet, the feeling persisted, like being watched through glass. She forced herself to eat a little, though her appetite was gone. The house felt smaller as night deepened. Every creak made her tense. She tried to distract herself by flipping through one of the books on the shelf, but the words blurred. A soft knock sounded at the door. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She froze, staring at the door as if it might open on its own. The knock came again. Careful. Controlled. Not hurried. Her phone buzzed almost immediately. "Do not answer." She backed away, pulse roaring in her ears. Whoever was outside didn't knock again. Instead, footsteps moved slowly across the porch. She heard the faint scrape of something near the window, then nothing. Minutes passed. 10. 15. She didn't move. Finally, another message came through. They were testing the house. Seeing who'd react. Her hands shook as she typed. "How did they find it?" "They didn't," he replied. "They guessed." That didn't make her feel better. Later that night, Alexander arrived quietly, letting himself in with a key. He looked tired in a way she hadn't seen before. Not physically exhausted, but weighed down. "They won't come back tonight," he said. That wasn't their style. She folded her arms, trying to keep her voice steady. "You sound like you know them." "I do," he said. "Enough to know this isn't about intimidation anymore." "What is it about then?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. He set his phone on the table, then looked at her with a seriousness that made her chest tighten. "They're trying to decide whether you're useful," he said. "Or disposable." The word hit hard. Jasmine swallowed. "And you?" "I'm trying to buy time," he said. "And figure out which mistake I made that put you in this position." She stared at him. "You still think this is your fault?" "It is," he said quietly. "I should have erased that night completely. Instead, I let myself see you as a person, not a variable." She let out a shaky laugh that surprised even her. "So that's my crime? Being seen?" He met her gaze. "In their world?" "Yes." Silence stretched between them. Outside, a car engine started, then faded into the distance. Alexander checked his phone again, his jaw tightening slightly. "They've escalated," he said. Jasmine felt the air leave her lungs. "How?" "They've accessed a sealed record," he replied. "Something tied to your past." Her mind raced. "I don't have secrets like that." He looked at her carefully. "Everyone does. Even if they don't know it yet." The room felt suddenly colder. "What record?" she asked. Alexander hesitated, just long enough to tell her the answer wouldn't be simple. "We'll talk in the morning," he said. "Right now you need rest." Jasmine nodded, but sleep felt impossible. As she lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, one thought pulsed louder than the rest. Whatever they'd found, it had finally made her more than a mistake. Morning arrived without relief. Jasmine woke before the sun, her body tense, her mind already racing. The house was quiet in a way that felt deliberate, as if even the walls were listening. She lay still, counting her breaths, until she heard movement in the kitchen. The soft clink of a mug against the counter. A chair sliding back. She got up slowly and followed the sound. Alexander stood by the window, coffee untouched in his hand. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. His jacket was still on from the night before, his tie loosened, his posture rigid. "You're up," he said without turning. "I never really went down," Jasmine replied. He nodded as if that confirmed something he already knew. "We don't have much time this morning." Her stomach tightened. "You said we'd talk." He finally turned to face her. "We will. But I need you to listen carefully, and I need you to stop me if something doesn't make sense." She folded her arms, bracing herself. "Okay." He set the mug down and pulled a thin folder from his bag. No logos. No labels. Just her name typed plainly on the front. Seeing it written there made her chest constrict. "I had my security team run a deeper background check," he said. "Not the standard one. The kind that finds things people didn't know were missing." She swallowed. "And?" He opened the folder and slid a single document across the table. A birth certificate. Her name was there. Her date of birth. The hospital. But the woman listed as her mother wasn't the name she knew. Jasmine stared at it, her vision narrowing. That's wrong." "It's not," Alexander said quietly. Her pulse roared in her ears. "My mother raised me. I watched her die. Don't tell me." "I'm not saying she didn't," he said gently. "I'm saying she wasn't the woman who gave birth to you." The room felt unsteady, like the floor had shifted an inch to the left. "That doesn't make sense," Jasmine said. "Why would that even matter to anyone?" Alexander leaned forward. "Because the woman listed here disappeared 23 years ago. And her disappearance is connected to the same financial network that's now watching you." Jasmine laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. "You're telling me I'm being followed because of a typo?" "I'm telling you," he said steady, "that you were quietly moved. Legally adopted under sealed circumstances. And that the people who arranged it had reasons to make sure no one ever connected you to her again." Her hands shook as she pushed the document away. "I never knew. I didn't ask for this." "I know," he said. "And that's what makes you dangerous to them." She looked up at him, eyes wide. "Dangerous how?" "Because if you exist," he said, "it means something they buried didn't stay buried." Silence swallowed the room. Jasmine sat down slowly, like her legs had finally given up holding her. "So what now?" she asked. "They think I know something I don't." "They don't know what you know," Alexander replied. "Only what you might become if the truth surfaces." Her voice dropped. "And what do you think?" He hesitated. "Just a fraction. Enough for her to notice." "I think," he said carefully, "that you're not the reason this started, but you might be the reason it ends." A sudden sound cut through the moment. Tires crunching slowly on gravel outside. Alexander's head snapped toward the window. He moved fast, crossing the room and pulling the curtain back just enough to see. "What is it?" Jasmine whispered. He didn't answer right away. A car idled at the curb. Not black. Not flashy. Completely forgettable. The kind that blended in everywhere. Alexander stepped back, his jaw tight. "They're not guessing anymore," he said. "They're confirming." Her throat went dry. "Confirming what?" "That you're worth escalating over." A knock echoed through the house. Firmer than last night. Confident. Jasmine stood, heart pounding. "You said they wouldn't come back." "I said not last night," he replied. The knock came again. Alexander reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone, typing quickly. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, eyes on the door, "you stay behind me. And you don't answer any questions unless I tell you to." The door handle shifted slightly. Jasmine's breath caught as the realization settled in. They weren't here to watch anymore. They were here to collect. The knock came a third time, heavier now. Not impatient. Certain. Alexander lifted a finger to his lips, signaling silence, then moved toward the door with measured steps. Jasmine stayed where she was, heart pounding so loudly she was sure it could be heard through the walls. Every instinct screamed to run, but her feet refused to move. "Mr. Brooks," a voice called from the other side. "Come. Professional. We'd like a word." Alexander didn't open the door right away. "You already had your chance to speak," he replied evenly. "Last night." A pause followed. Then a faint smile crept into the voice. "Last night was reconnaissance. Today is procedure." Jasmine's stomach twisted. Alexander finally opened the door, but only a few inches. Two men stood on the porch. Not the same ones from the alley. These looked cleaner. Government clean. Neutral expressions. No sunglasses. No visible weapons. "We're not here to threaten," one of them said, holding up a badge just long enough to be seen, not read. "We're here to ensure cooperation." "With whom?" Alexander asked. "With you," the man replied. "And with her." Jasmine's breath caught. Alexander shifted subtly, blocking the line of sight behind him. "She's under my protection," Alexander said. "If you have questions, you go through me." The second man glanced past him, eyes scanning the interior. "This doesn't have to be complicated. We just need her to come with us. Voluntarily." "No," Alexander said flatly. Silence stretched. The first man's jaw tightened slightly. "You're making assumptions about who we represent." Alexander's voice dropped. "And you're assuming I don't know." That landed. The men exchanged a brief look, just long enough to confirm something unspoken. "You have 24 hours, the first man said finally. "After that, this stops being a courtesy." "Get off my property," Alexander replied. The men stepped back, unhurried, then turned and walked down the steps. The forgettable car rolled away without urgency, disappearing down the street like it had never been there. Alexander closed the door and locked it. Jasmine exhaled shakily, her legs finally giving way as she sat down hard on the couch. "Who were they?" she asked. "Not who they claimed to be," Alexander said. He ran a hand through his hair, the first visible crack in his composure. "They're contractors." Plausible deniability wrapped in paperwork. "And they want me," she said. "They want leverage," he replied. "You're the cleanest one they've got." Her voice trembled. "I didn't choose any of this." "I know," he said quietly. "But they don't care about choice. They care about control." He knelt in front of her, meeting her eye level. "Listen to me. We can't stay here." "Where do we go?" she asked. "Somewhere they can't move quickly," he said. "Somewhere public with witnesses." She frowned. "Public makes me feel less safe." "It makes them less bold," he countered. "They thrive in shadows." Within an hour they were on the road again. This time Jasmine noticed the route wasn't direct. Alexander doubled back, switched lanes abruptly, merged into traffic patterns designed to shake anyone following. He didn't explain. He didn't have to. They stopped at a large medical complex on the edge of the city. Bright. Busy. Ordinary. "A hospital?" Jasmine asked. "Records," Alexander said. "People think money hides secrets. It doesn't. Bureaucracy does." Inside, the air smelled like antiseptic and coffee. The hum of voices, footsteps, and overhead announcements wrapped around Jasmine, grounding her. She hadn't realized how badly she needed normal noise. They sat in a quiet administrative office while Alexander spoke in low tones with a woman behind a glass window. Papers were exchanged. IDs verified. Time passed. Finally, the woman returned with a thin envelope. Alexander thanked her and guided Jasmine toward a secluded corner near the elevators. "What's in that?" she asked. "Confirmation," he said. He opened the envelope just enough for her to see the top page. A hospital seal. A familiar name. The same one from the birth certificate. "She was here," Alexander said. "2 years ago." Briefly. Jasmine's heart skipped. "Alive." "Yes," he said. "And scared enough to disappear again." The world seemed to narrow to that single fact. "My birth mother is alive," Jasmine whispered. "And running," Alexander added. "From the same people who just knocked on my door." Before Jasmine could respond, Alexander's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. "They've filed something," he said. "A legal motion." "For what?" she asked. "To detain you," he replied. "Not as a suspect. As an asset." Her chest tightened. "Can they do that?" "They can try," he said. "And if they succeed, I won't be able to reach you." A security announcement echoed overhead, calling for assistance in another wing. Alexander met her eyes, urgency replacing calm. "We're running out of time," he said. "And now they're playing by rules that look legitimate." Jasmine felt the weight of the truth settle deep in her chest. This was no longer about hiding. It was about whether the truth could survive long enough to matter. The hospital felt different once Alexander said the word detain. The bright lights no longer felt reassuring. The steady flow of people felt like cover, perfect places to disappear someone quietly. Alexander didn't waste time. He took Jasmine's hand, not dramatically, just firmly, and guided her toward the elevator bank. His grip was steady, grounding. "Listen to me," he said under his breath. "If anyone stops us, you say nothing. Not your name. Not your date of birth. Nothing." Her throat felt dry. "What if they have papers?" "They will," he said. "That doesn't mean they're valid." The elevator doors opened. Inside were 3 nurses and a man in a business suit staring at his phone. Jasmine's chest tightened, but Alexander's posture never changed. Calm was his weapon. They exited on a lower floor, then immediately moved toward a public cafe inside the hospital. Families sat with paper cups. A child laughed loudly at something on a tablet. Normal life pressed in from all sides. Alexander chose a table near the center, not hidden, not exposed. "This is intentional," he said quietly as they sat. "They won't make a move here unless they're desperate." Jasmine nodded, though her hands trembled slightly as she wrapped them around a cup of water. "What happens if they win?" she asked. Alexander didn't answer right away. He watched the entrances, the reflections in the glass, the people who lingered too long. "If they take you," he said finally, "you won't be hurt. Not physically. But you'll be isolated. Controlled. Your past rewritten in official language until you're no longer legally you." The words sank deep. "And my birth mother?" Jasmine asked. "Is that why they're rushing?" "Yes," he said. "She surfaced briefly 2 years ago trying to access an old trust account tied to the Shell network. Someone panicked. They erased her again. But records leave shadows." Jasmine swallowed hard. "She tried to find something. She tried to protect you," he said. That hit harder than anything else. Alexander's phone buzzed again. This time he didn't hide the screen. Motion filed. "Temporary custody pending review." "They're accelerating," he said. "Which means they're afraid." A man across the cafe stood up suddenly, adjusting his jacket. Another woman near the exit checked her phone, glanced toward them, then looked away too quickly. Alexander leaned closer. "We're leaving. Now." They stood, blending into the moving crowd. Jasmine kept her head down, her senses sharp. Every step felt heavy, deliberate. As they reached the exit, a voice called out, "Miss Turner." Jasmine froze. Alexander's grip tightened just enough to steady her. He turned calmly. "Yes?" he said as if the name belonged to him. The man approaching wore a hospital badge clipped neatly to his jacket. "Too neat. Too new." We just need a moment of your time, the man said, eyes flicking briefly to Jasmine. It's about a clerical matter. Alexander smiled, polite and empty. Then you'll schedule it? Through counsel. The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. This won't take long. Behind him, two more figures appeared, positioning themselves subtly, blocking exits, creating space. Jasmine's heart hammered. Alexander leaned in, his voice barely audible. Remember what I said? She nodded, breath shallow. The man reached into his jacket. Before he could pull anything out, a loud voice cut through the tension. Jasmine? They all turned. A woman stood near the information desk. Mid-40s. Tired eyes. Nervous posture. She looked at Jasmine like she was seeing a ghost. Jasmine felt the world tilt. The woman took a hesitant step forward, her voice trembling. It's you, she said softly. I knew it was you. Alexander stiffened. Do you know her? The suited man asked sharply. Jasmine couldn't speak. Her chest felt like it was caving in. The woman's eyes filled with tears. I've been looking for you for years. Alexander swore under his breath. Because in that moment, Jasmine understood the truth before anyone said it. The woman standing in front of her wasn't a stranger. She was the one person the shadow network never wanted to surface. Her birth mother had found her. And the people hunting them had just watched it happen. The cafe seemed to fall away, the noise dulling into a distant hum. Jasmine stared at the woman, her mind struggling to catch up to what her eyes were already telling her. The resemblance was subtle but undeniable. The same curve of the jaw. The same crease between the brows when anxious. A mirror aged by years and fear. You can't be here, Alexander said quietly, his voice sharp with urgency. The woman flinched at his tone but didn't look away from Jasmine. I didn't mean for this to happen like this, she said. I just wanted to see her. To know she was real. The suited man recovered quickly. Ma'am, please step aside, he said, placing himself slightly between the woman and Jasmine. This doesn't concern you. It concerns me, the woman shot back, her voice shaking. You people took my child. That did it. The air shifted. The careful balance Alexander had been holding cracked. Enough, Alexander said. We're leaving. He guided Jasmine back a step, but she didn't move. Her legs felt locked in place, her chest tight with something that felt dangerously close to hope. You're my mother? Jasmine asked, the words fragile, almost afraid of being spoken. The woman nodded, tears slipping free. My name is Rachel Turner, she said. And yes, I am. The suited man's jaw tightened. He reached for his radio. Alexander moved instantly. He stepped forward, his presence commanding, his voice carrying just enough to draw attention from nearby patrons. If anyone here is thinking of interfering with a civilian in a public hospital, he said calmly, I suggest you reconsider your career choices. People were watching now. Phones half raised. Curious eyes tracking the tension. The suited man hesitated. Not because he was unsure, but because witnesses changed everything. Rachel took advantage of the moment. She grabbed Jasmine's hand, her grip trembling but determined. We don't have much time, she whispered. They've been following me too. I tried to stay away, but when I saw you on the security monitor... You what? Jasmine breathed. I work here, Rachel said quickly. Records. Night shift. I recognized your name months ago. I confirmed it 2 days ago. That's when they noticed. Alexander swore under his breath again. You should have come to me. Rachel looked at him sharply. I didn't know who to trust. I still don't. That stung, but Alexander didn't argue. He glanced around. Security was moving closer now, drawn by the attention. We need to separate, he said quietly. Right now. Jasmine's head snapped toward him. What? They can't take all three of us without it becoming a scene, he explained. But they'll try to take one. Rachel's eyes widened. They'll take me. No, Alexander said. They'll take Jasmine. She's the leverage. Jasmine felt the words hit like ice water. Rachel shook her head fiercely. Then I won't let go of her. You don't understand, Alexander said. If they take you, you disappear again. If they take her, he stopped, choosing his words carefully. She still has options. Jasmine looked between them, panic rising. You're talking about me like I'm not here. Alexander met her eyes. I'm trying to keep you free. A hospital security officer approached cautiously. Sir, ma'am, is there a problem? Yes, the suited man said smoothly. This woman is being escorted for administrative review. He reached for Jasmine's arm. Alexander blocked him. Rachel screamed. Don't touch her. The cafe erupted into noise. Someone shouted. Someone else started filming openly. In the chaos, Alexander leaned close to Jasmine's ear. When I say move, you run. Don't look back. Her heart hammered. What about you? I'll handle them, he said. I always do. Rachel squeezed Jasmine's hand. Listen to him, she whispered desperately. I didn't survive this long to lose you again. The suited man barked something into his radio. Alexander straightened, his voice loud now. Officer, I'd like this man's credentials verified immediately. The officer hesitated. Sir, Now, Alexander said, steel beneath the calm. That moment of hesitation was all it took. Alexander leaned down. Now. Jasmine ran. She pushed through the crowd, past startled faces and raised phones, her lungs burning as she sprinted toward the exit. Behind her, voices shouted. Footsteps pounded. She burst through the hospital doors into the blinding daylight, fear and adrenaline carrying her forward. She didn't stop until she reached the street. Only then did she realize something terrible. In the chaos, her hand had slipped free. Rachel wasn't with her. And Alexander hadn't followed. As sirens wailed somewhere nearby, Jasmine stood alone on the sidewalk, shaking, with one crushing thought echoing in her mind. They had taken someone. She just didn't know who. Jasmine ducked into an alley 2 blocks away, her back sliding down the cold brick wall as her legs finally gave out. Her chest heaved, each breath sharp and uneven, like her body hadn't yet realized she was alive. Sirens wailed closer now, then farther, then closer again. Think. Alexander's voice echoed in her head. Come. Controlled. Always 3 steps ahead. She wiped her face with shaking hands and forced herself to move. He wouldn't have sent her running without a plan. He never did. Her phone buzzed. She nearly dropped it. A known number. If you're reading this, you did exactly what I told you to do. Her throat tightened. Don't reply. Don't call. Assume everything is monitored. She backed deeper into the shadow of the alley, heart pounding. They took Rachel. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. She gave herself up to buy you time. Jasmine pressed her fist to her mouth to keep from sobbing out loud. I couldn't stop it without exposing you. Pause. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Then. But she left us something. Jasmine's breathing slowed just a little. Check your jacket. Inside pocket. Her hands trembled as she slipped her fingers into the lining. Paper. Folded small. Worn soft with age. She pulled it out. A hospital wristband. Her name printed in faded ink. Jasmine Turner. Below it, a date, one she didn't recognize, and a tiny handwritten note on the back. You were born screaming. That's how I knew you were strong. Her knees buckled again, but this time she didn't fall. She leaned against the wall, clutching the band like it was the only solid thing left in the world. The phone buzzed once more. Rachel hit a data drive before they took her. Records. Transfers. Names. Proof. Jasmine swallowed hard. She trusted you to finish what she started. Another pause. Meet me where the river bends under the old bridge. 1 hour. Come alone. The screen went dark. Jasmine stared at her reflection in the black glass of the phone. The girl who had walked into the hospital cafe that morning felt gone, replaced by someone sharper, sadder, and suddenly furious. They thought taking Rachel would scare her back into silence. They were wrong. She tucked the wristband close to her heart, stepped out of the alley, and started walking toward the river, toward the truth that had already cost too much to turn away from now. The river moved slow beneath the bridge, thick and dark, carrying bits of ice that clinked softly against the concrete supports. Jasmine stood at the edge, coat pulled tight around her, the night air cutting through layers she hadn't realized were too thin until now. Every sound felt louder. Water. Wind. Her own breathing. She checked the time on her phone. 2 minutes past the hour. Alexander was late. She told herself not to panic, but fear had learned her shape too well. It settled in her chest and refused to move. Headlights flashed once on the far side of the bridge. Then again. A black sedan rolled into view and stopped with its engine still running. The driver's door opened slowly, deliberately. Alexander stepped out, hands visible, his posture careful in the way of someone who understood how quickly a wrong movement could end everything. Jasmine didn't run to him. She waited until he crossed half the distance on foot. "You're alive," she said. It came out flat, like she was confirming a detail on a form. "So are you." His eyes flicked to her hands, her face, the shadows behind her. "That's what matters." She pulled the hospital wristband from her pocket and held it up. "You knew." Alexander exhaled. Not relief. Resignation. "I suspected." "That's not an answer." "No," he said quietly. "It's the honest version." They stood there, the river between their words filling the silence. Finally, he nodded toward the bench under the bridge and sat. She followed, every step heavy with things she hadn't said yet. "Rachel wasn't just a housekeeper," Jasmine said. "She was my mother." Alexander closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, there was no surprise left to hide. "She protected you the only way she knew how." "You paid her to disappear," Jasmine shot back. "You let me grow up thinking I was abandoned." "I paid to keep you alive," he said, voice steady but strained. "Her ex-husband had connections. Bad ones. When he found out about you, she came to me terrified. I moved money. I erased records. I put distance between you and men who don't leave witnesses." Jasmine laughed once, sharp and broken. "So you outsourced my childhood." Alexander flinched. "I made a choice. Not a perfect one. Just the one that kept you breathing." She wanted to scream at him. Instead, she pulled out the data drive Rachel had hidden and placed it on the bench between them. "She didn't trust you anymore," Jasmine said. "She trusted me." He stared at the drive. "That's fair." They sat in silence as the weight of it all pressed down. Finally, Alexander spoke again. "What do you want to do?" The question surprised her. "You're not going to tell me?" she asked. "I don't get to anymore." Jasmine thought of Rachel's hands, always steady. Of the way she'd smiled like she was borrowing time. Of the truth sitting inches from them on cold metal. "I'm turning it in," Jasmine said. "All of it. The bribes. The shell companies. The people you protected because they were useful." Alexander nodded slowly. "That will cost me everything." She met his eyes. "It already cost me enough." Sirens echoed faintly in the distance. Not close yet, but coming. Alexander stood and removed his coat, draping it over her shoulders without asking. For once she didn't pull away. "I'll testify," he said. "I'll confirm the records. I'll make sure Rachel's name is cleared." Jasmine's throat tightened. "And after?" "After," he said softly, "I live with what I've done." Police lights appeared at the far end of the bridge, blue and red painting the concrete in slow pulses. Jasmine picked up the data drive and stepped forward. She didn't look back. Months later, sunlight filled the small apartment Jasmine now called home. No luxury. No drivers. Just quiet mornings and walls that didn't echo with secrets. A framed photo sat on the windowsill. Rachel, smiling mid-laugh, caught off guard. Jasmine adjusted the frame and turned toward the door as a knock sounded. A reporter waited outside, notebook in hand, eyes curious but respectful. "Miss Turner," she said, "people want to know how it feels to finally be heard." Jasmine thought for a moment before answering. "It feels like breathing after holding it too long," she said. "And if this story stayed with you, if it made you pause or think or feel something you didn't expect, stay with us. Subscribe. These stories matter because they're real and because someone, somewhere is still waiting to be seen."